If you've ever been betrayed by someone you once called family, you'll want to hear this to the end. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because this revenge story isn't just about justice, it's about a mother who refused to stay silent. The courtroom was packed, tense, every whisper dying the moment Judge Morales entered. When he saw me, his face changed, like he'd seen a ghost. My daughter-in-law Jessica sat there in her emerald dress, her legs crossed, her lawyer at her side, radiating smug confidence. My son Michael leaned on his crutch beside me, his face pale but calm. He didn't know what was coming. No one did. Weeks earlier, Chicago's sky had been gray when I helped him up the courthouse steps. His accident at the construction site had changed everything, turning a once vibrant man into someone who moved slowly, painfully, holding on to his crutches as if they were his lifeline. People stared, whispered. I kept my chin high. I had carried him before. I'd do it again. Jessica stepped out of a luxury car like a queen arriving at her coronation. Red lips, designer dress, parents following behind like her royal entourage. The same family that had smiled at us at weddings now smirked as if victory was theirs. They had no idea what I was capable of. Inside the courtroom, Jessica tapped her heels, whispering something to her mother as Michael sat quietly, gripping his crutches. Her lawyer, Jennifer Rivers, stood and declared in a booming voice, "My client's husband can no longer fulfill his role as a father or partner. We're seeking divorce and half the house." Each word hit like a hammer. I clenched my old leather briefcase, the one that had held my legal papers decades ago. They thought I was just a sweet, frail mother. They had no clue who I used to be. My mind flashed back to the beginning. I'd raised Michael alone after his father left one night without warning, chasing a wealthy widow. Michael had been 10, sobbing into my arms while I promised him we'd survive. And we did. I worked mornings at an office, nights doing neighborhood accounting, walking home through flooded streets holding his tiny hand under a broken umbrella. When he got into engineering school, I pawned my wedding ring to pay his tuition. When he built our 2-story home on the edge of the city, I cried as he placed the keys in my hand and said, "No one can ever kick us out, Mom." Then he met Jessica. At first, she was radiant sweet, eager to help in the kitchen, talking about children and family. But after Michael's accident, the mask slipped. Her patience wore thin fast. When Michael asked for help to get to the garden one morning, she didn't even look up from her coffee. "I'm not his nurse," she snapped later that night when he asked for help with his aching leg. I heard every word through the door, my hands shaking on the knob. That's when the cracks turned into gaping wounds. Jessica began dressing like she was single, going out at night, ignoring dinners, whispering on the phone about splitting the house and starting over. I froze when I heard her say it. The house. The one my son built with sweat and tears. She wasn't leaving empty-handed, she was plotting. Then came the worst part. One night, I overheard her telling our 8-year-old granddaughter Sarah to lie in court. "Say you don't want to live with your sick father," Jessica hissed through the bedroom door. Sarah's small voice trembled. "But I love Daddy. I don't want to lie." Jessica's reply was icy. "If you don't obey, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and invalid father?" My chest tightened. She was turning my granddaughter into a pawn. The next morning, under the orange tree in the backyard, I sat Sarah down. She burst into tears, hugging me, begging not to lie. I promised her she wouldn't have to. "The truth is our strongest weapon," I whispered. In that moment, I decided I wouldn't just defend Michael. I'd fight for Sarah too. I called Robert Medina, an old ally from my legal days. Once upon a time, they'd called me the Queen of Law. I'd left that world after a corrupt judge took everything from me in a rigged trial. But those skills, they never left. Robert met me in a quiet coffee shop, slid a thin folder across the table and said, "Be ready, Linda. This is ugly." Inside were photos. Jessica, in a red dress, on the arm of a real estate mogul named William Harris walking out of a Gold Coast hotel. Restaurant receipts, flight tickets, bank transfers. This wasn't infidelity, it was a calculated scheme. William funded her nights out, her dresses, her arrogance. Jessica wasn't just leaving my son, she was trying to strip him of everything and run off into luxury. I hid the evidence away. Michael had suffered enough. But I prepared. The morning of the first hearing, Jessica arrived like a peacock on parade, laughing with her family as if court were a fashion show. Inside, her lawyer painted Michael as a burden. Jessica added venom, he's worthless. I deserve better. Michael tried to speak, to defend himself, but his voice broke as he struggled to stand. She laughed. That sound carved into me like a knife. Then I stood up. Calmly, I walked to the defense table, opened my briefcase, and declared, "From this moment, I represent my son." The room froze. Jessica's lawyer's eyes widened. Jessica herself paled. Judge Morales leaned forward. "Mrs. Carter, are you the Queen of Law?" Murmurs filled the room. People remembered. Michael looked at me like he was seeing his mother for the first time. And so, the battle truly began. The next hearing felt different. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors, reporters, even strangers filled the benches. Whispers floated through the air like wildfire. The Queen of Law is back. I walked in holding Michael's trembling hand, Sarah by my side. Jessica sat at the defendant's table in a tailored navy dress, her usual smirk flickering. Her lawyer, Jennifer, clutched her papers a little too tightly. They had expected an easy victory. Now, they weren't so sure. When Judge Morales entered, the room fell silent. His gaze met mine. Steady, assessing, but with a flicker of respect. He invited me to begin. I rose slowly, unzipped my briefcase with deliberate precision, and placed the property documents on the table one by one. My voice cut through the silence like a blade. Your Honor, these documents show that the house in question was purchased 2 years before the marriage. It is in my son's name exclusively. This is not marital property. The clerk reviewed them carefully. He nodded. Then the judge nodded. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Jessica's parents turned pale. Her brother lowered his gaze. Jennifer stood quickly, her voice trembling under its forced professionalism. Your Honor, while the house may have been separate initially, years of cohabitation can convert it into marital property. I didn't even let her finish. Mrs. Rivers, I interrupted coldly. The law is clear. Common residence does not override ownership of premarital property. This house belongs to my son and my granddaughter's future. Her mouth snapped shut. Jessica's fists clenched under the table. But that was only my opening move. I pulled a small USB drive from my briefcase and handed it to the clerk. Your Honor, I present audio evidence recorded in this very house the night before the first hearing. The recording played. Jessica's voice filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. Sarah, tomorrow in court, you have to say you don't want to live with your sick father. Say you don't want to live with him anymore, understand? Sarah's small, trembling voice answered through the speakers. But I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Daddy. Jessica's voice turned vicious. If you don't do what I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and your invalid father? Gasps rippled through the courtroom. People shifted in their seats, eyes narrowing toward Jessica. She shot to her feet, her face red. That's fake. She doctored it. Her voice cracked, betraying her panic. Jennifer tugged her arm, urging her to sit down. The judge raised his gavel. Order. Then he looked toward the clerk. Call the child to the stand. Sarah walked in slowly, her small hands twisting nervously, her eyes red from crying. My heart squeezed at the sight of her. She was only 8, yet she was about to face her mother in court. Jessica leaned forward, softening her tone to a sickly sweet voice. Sarah, honey, tell everyone you want to stay with me, right? The courtroom held its breath. Sarah looked at the judge, then at her father sitting weakly at the plaintiff's table. She straightened her little back. I love my daddy, she said, her voice trembling but clear. I'm not going to lie. I want to live with Daddy and Grandma." The room erupted in whispers, a few claps breaking through despite the judge's calls for order. Michael buried his face in his hands and sobbed silently. I felt Sarah press against my side, clinging to my dress. I wrapped my arm around her and whispered, "You were so brave." Jessica's face drained of all color. "She's been manipulated," she shrieked. This woman brainwashed her, but no one was listening anymore. The damage was done. Then Jessica made her desperate move. She stood, her voice rising. "Don't believe her. This woman isn't some hero. She's a washed-up lawyer who lost everything in disgrace. She left the law because she failed. You can't trust her." The room stirred. Reporters scribbled furiously. Michael lowered his head, gripping his crutches tight, his knuckles white. Sarah's small hand squeezed mine in fear. Jessica thought she'd cornered me, but she'd only opened the door to the truth. I stepped forward slowly. My voice was calm but razor-sharp. "Yes, I left the law, but not because I was weak. Years ago, I lost a case, not because of incompetence, but because my ex-husband and his wealthy mistress bribed the judge. My arguments were flawless." The verdict was bought. The room fell dead silent. I walked away that day because I refused to work in a system that rewarded corruption. That same judge is now in prison on bribery charges. I chose dignity over dirt. And today, I stand here not for power or glory, but for my son, for my granddaughter, and for the truth. I saw heads nodding. The older folks in the gallery whispered my name, remembering the woman who once fought giants in court. Even Judge Morales leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly. "I can attest to that," he said gravely. "When I was a young lawyer, Mrs. Carter defended me. She's the reason I still believe in justice." A collective shiver ran through the room. Jessica swayed in her seat, her composure cracking like glass. Jennifer flipped through her papers aimlessly, knowing the tide had turned. Jessica's family avoided eye contact, shrinking under the weight of the public gaze. The judge announced a recess. His gavel struck the bench like a drumbeat of destiny. Outside, strangers approached me with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," one elderly woman whispered, squeezing my hand. "You reminded us that truth still matters." Michael stood beside me, stunned. "Mom," he whispered, tears streaking down his cheeks. "I didn't know. I never knew you were this strong." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I never stopped being your mother," I said softly. "I just put the armor away for a while." Sarah squeezed between us, holding our hands tightly. For the first time in a long time, I saw something flicker in Michael's eyes, not despair, but hope. But I wasn't finished yet. The verdict was still ahead, and Jessica was like a cornered animal. Desperate people make reckless moves, and I was ready for every single one. The second hearing carried a tension you could almost touch. Whispers filled the packed courtroom before the judge entered, the crowd buzzing with rumors about the return of the Queen of Law. I walked in between my son and granddaughter, one on each side. Michael's hand trembled as it held my arm. Sarah clung to my other hand, her small fingers squeezing tight. She didn't fully understand the legal war unfolding, but she understood loyalty. Jessica was already seated, her flawless makeup and expensive navy suit doing nothing to hide the flicker of fear in her eyes. Her lawyer, Jennifer, adjusted her papers again and again, nervous habits I knew all too well. Judge Morales entered. Silence dropped like a heavy curtain. He gestured for me to proceed. I rose, opened my old briefcase slowly, and laid the property documents on the table one at a time. My voice was steady and sharp. "Your Honor, these records show that the house was purchased 2 years before the marriage. It is in my son's name only. It is separate property and cannot be divided." The clerk inspected the papers carefully and nodded. The judge reviewed them, then looked back up with quiet approval. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Jessica's parents blanched, her brother stared at the floor. Jennifer rose quickly, trying to regain control. "Your Honor," she began, her voice already trembling under the weight of the room, "while the property may have been initially separate, years of cohabitation." I cut her off cleanly. Mrs. Rivers, the law is explicit. Common residence does not override ownership of premarital property. This house is my son's. Period. The judge raised an eyebrow. Jennifer froze. Jessica's jaw tightened as she stared at me with cold fury. But this was only my first strike. I pulled a small USB drive from my briefcase and handed it to the clerk. Your Honor, I have audio evidence recorded the night before this trial. When the speakers played Jessica's voice, sharp and unmistakable, the entire room leaned forward. Sarah, tomorrow in court you have to say you don't want to live with your sick father. Say you don't want to live with him anymore. Understand? A child's trembling voice followed. But I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Daddy. Jessica's reply was ice cold. If you don't do what I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and invalid father? Gasps filled the room. Neighbors covered their mouths. Even strangers glared in disgust. Jessica shot up from her seat, her face crimson. That's fake. She's lying. Her shrill voice cracked. Jennifer grabbed her arm to pull her back down. The judge raised his gavel. Order in the court. Then he called for Sarah to testify. She walked in slowly, wearing a blue dress and clutching her stuffed bunny, her silent armor. Her eyes were red, her steps small but determined. Jessica leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Sarah, honey, tell everyone you want to stay with me, right? Every heartbeat in that courtroom paused. Sarah looked at her father, slumped with his crutches, then at me. Then she turned to the judge and said clearly, I love my daddy, I'm not going to lie. I want to live with Daddy and Grandma. The reaction was instant. The audience erupted in whispers, some clapping despite the judge's attempts to quiet them. Michael's shoulders shook as he buried his face in his hands, sobbing silently. I felt Sarah lean against me and I wrapped my arm around her. You were so brave, I whispered into her hair. Jessica's mask shattered. She's been manipulated, she screamed. This woman brainwashed her. No one cared. Her words were like desperate flailing. Then, in a last-ditch attempt to destroy me, Jessica stood tall, her voice ringing out, Don't believe her. She's a washed-up lawyer who lost everything. She left the law in disgrace. She's not some hero. You can't trust her, the room murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. Michael looked down, gripping his crutches as if bracing for impact. Sarah's little hand tightened around mine. Jessica thought she'd found my weak spot. She didn't know she'd just given me the stage. I stepped forward slowly, facing the judge and the entire courtroom. My voice came out calm, but every word was edged with steel. Yes, I left the law, but not because I failed. Years ago, I lost one case, not due to lack of skill, but because the judge had been bribed by my ex-husband and his wealthy lover. Every argument I made was flawless. The verdict was bought. I refused to be part of that corruption. I left to preserve my integrity. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. That same judge is now in prison. I walked away from the profession, but not from justice. And I stand here today not for glory, but for my son, for my granddaughter, and for the truth. Slow nods spread through the courtroom like a wave. The older folks whispered my name, some remembered the stories. Judge Morales leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly. I can confirm, he said, his voice grave. When I was a young lawyer, Mrs. Carter defended me in court. She fought for the law when others bent it. She's the reason I became who I am today. Jessica visibly flinched. Her family avoided my gaze entirely. Jennifer flipped through her notes helplessly. I had taken the weapon Jessica tried to use against me and turned it into a hammer. The judge declared a recess. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. Outside the courtroom, people approached me like I was a legend pulled from the past. An older woman grabbed my hand. Thank you, she whispered, tears in her eyes. You reminded us that truth still exists. Michael turned to me, eyes wide, tears streaming. Mom, I had no idea. I placed my hand on his shoulder gently. You didn't need to. I was always your mother first. The rest, I just kept locked away. Sarah squeezed my hand and whispered, "Grandma, you're like a superhero." I laughed softly and kissed her forehead, but I knew better than to relax. Jessica wasn't the type to go down quietly. The verdict was still ahead. She had lost control of the narrative, but desperate people lash out. I had proof, strategy, and a courtroom full of people now watching every move she made. And I wasn't done yet. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, I could feel the tide turning. The day of the final verdict felt like the entire city was holding its breath. The courtroom was overflowing. Reporters filled every corner, neighbors leaned forward on the benches, strangers stood along the walls. Even those who had whispered in doubt now came to witness what would happen. I walked in holding Michael's arm. His crutches tapped rhythmically on the floor, steady but fragile. On my other side, Sarah's small hand wrapped around mine like a promise. Her eyes were wide, worried but brave. Jessica sat at the defendant's table dressed in a sleek black outfit, but the confidence was gone. Her face was pale, her hands clasped too tightly in her lap. Her lawyer Jennifer avoided eye contact, flipping papers she knew wouldn't save her. Jessica's family sat behind her, stiff and quiet, the arrogant chatter of earlier hearings replaced by the heavy silence of people who realized the storm had turned against them. When Judge Morales entered, the room fell still. He scanned the room slowly before speaking. After reviewing all evidence, testimony, and legal documents, he began, his voice echoing off the wooden walls. The court delivers the following verdict. Michael's breath hitched. Sarah squeezed my hand tighter. The divorce between Mrs. Jessica Torres and Mr. Michael Carter is granted, the judge declared firmly. The full ownership of the Carter family home shall remain with Mr. Stash Carter, as it is proven to be separate property acquired prior to the marriage. Custody of the minor, Sarah Carter, is awarded to her father and grandmother, Mrs. Danver Carter. Mrs. Torres will receive no financial benefits and may only visit the child under judicial supervision. The words landed like thunder. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then whispers rose like a wave, then light applause. The kind people give when justice doesn't just happen, but feels right. Michael crumpled against me, his thin body trembling as years of fear and humiliation finally cracked open into tears. "Mom, we won," he whispered, his voice broken but alive. Sarah flung her arms around us both, crying, "Grandma! Daddy, I get to stay with you." Her tiny shoulders shook against my chest, and I held her tighter than ever. Jessica exploded. She shot to her feet, her face twisted with rage. "This isn't fair. I'll appeal." "You can't do this to me." Her voice rang out, shrill and desperate. But Jennifer gently tugged her arm, shaking her head. "Jessica," she whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "it's over. We lost." Jessica's knees buckled, and for the first time, she looked small. Her family rose silently, heads lowered, and followed her out. No one met anyone's eyes. The room wasn't filled with gloating or cruelty, just quiet justice. Watching Jessica walk away, I felt no triumph. Only a soft, sad ache for the girl she used to be and the choices she had made. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood was buzzing with the aftermath. Word spread quickly that William Harris, the wealthy man behind Jessica's schemes, had cut her off completely once he realized she'd lost the case. The luxury cars stopped arriving. The dresses disappeared. She moved into a shabby rented apartment on the outskirts of town. Some whispered that she left Chicago entirely. I didn't care to find out. My war wasn't with her anymore. My focus turned to rebuilding. Michael began physical therapy with a new fire in his eyes. He was no longer the broken man sitting silently in his wheelchair. He was a father and a son who had fought a battle and won. At first, his steps were shaky, but Sarah would run beside him, cheering, "Daddy, you're my superhero." And every time she said it, something lit up inside him again. Our dinners changed too. Where once Jessica's cold presence had made the table tense, now laughter returned. Sarah told us stories from school while I cooked Michael's favorite meals: chili, stuffed peppers, warm soups that smelled like home. Michael teased Sarah gently as she helped set the table, and I sat watching them with quiet joy, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in years. One sunny afternoon, I found Sarah in my closet wearing my old high heels, wobbling across the living room with a mock-serious expression. "Grandma," she announced, pointing a pencil like a microphone, "I'm going to be the best lawyer ever, just like you." Michael burst out laughing from his chair on the porch, the kind of laugh that shakes years of sadness off your shoulders. I joined them outside, sitting on the porch with the orange tree in full bloom beside us. The bells from the downtown church rang softly in the distance, this time not as ominous tolls, but as calm, clear chimes. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what I would have done without you." I looked at him, my son, the boy I raised through storms, the man who nearly lost everything, the father who found his strength again, and I smiled. "You don't have to know," I replied. "We did this together." That's what family is. I looked up at the bright Chicago sky through the branches of the orange tree. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Life had taken so much from us: health, trust, the illusion of perfect family. But it couldn't take away the two things that mattered most: truth and love. Those had guided me through the darkness, given me the strength to return to the courtroom and to protect the people I loved most. And if my story reaches even one person who's sitting in silence, watching their family fall apart and wondering if they have the strength to fight back, I want them to know you do. Justice may sleep for a while, but it never dies. It waits for brave hearts to awaken it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth it. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because justice doesn't belong to one house, one courtroom, or one city. It belongs to all of us.